Good afternoon, everybody. I always do that, and people say good afternoon, right? Good afternoon. Yeah. Anyway, thanks for being here. This is obviously the budget rollout for 2026, and this is a budget that complies with the Constitution and applicable laws. And before we get into the nitty-gritty with some of the folks behind me and asking questions, you know, Alaska is a unique state. I think we all know that and believe that, but sometimes we have to just revisit some history on the great state of Alaska. It was a gamble from the get-go. In 1867, William Seward, and I think we're the only state that really remembers or reveres a Secretary of State, but William Seward in 1867 consummated a purchase from Russia, and we took possession of the state of Alaska, the United States did, for its resource potential and its geopolitical location. It's important to know that. And so Alaska was a dream, Alaska was a risk. And to this day, like America, it's an experiment, and Alaska remains a dream. We have a great motto, North of the Future, and we have enormous potential, and we've just scratched the surface on that potential. So it was purchased for $6.7 million. We probably can repay that in half a day of oil production. And so just to put that in perspective, but we also have tremendous amounts of other resources in Alaska. Huge amounts of gas, huge amounts of rare earths, copper, lead, zinc, gold, silver, you name it. We've got it almost unlike any other state. We have enormous amounts of potential farmland, forests, water. We have everything we need here in the state of Alaska to pay our way to create a future for our kids and our grandkids if we so choose to do that. So the issue with Alaska is going to be not that we're running out of resource to be able to pay our way, but are we going to make good policy decisions moving forward? And that's part of what this budget is about. That's part of what the discussion is going to be with the legislature this session. Tremendous opportunities. We've recently just had an election. The people have spoken as to who they're sending to down to Juneau. It's when I say split legislature between Republicans, Democrats, and some independents. So there's going to have to be dialogue for us to accomplish tasks on behalf of the people of Alaska. And I would say no matter what anyone says, the people of Alaska want us to be able to produce policy and budgets at the end that benefit the people of Alaska. Not necessarily special interests, not necessarily just one segment of Alaska, but everybody in Alaska. When I ran for office back in 2017, I was interviewed by a reporter, and in August of 2017. And it was an extensive interview, and one of the questions was, what is it that you want to focus on? And back in 2017, it was public safety, better educational outcomes, balanced budget, and making sure we get investment in Alaska. And that's what all of our budgets, that's what all of our policies have been ever since I ran for this office. People of Alaska sent me down here for a second time under a new voting scheme, ranked choice voting, and we performed pretty well, I would say. And so we're here because the people want us here. The legislature's here because the people want the legislature here. But again, in order to make things work, we're going to have to really work together. And we believe we're going to have a pretty good policy package that we'll roll out here in a few weeks on everything from education to energy to land use, you name it. But Alaska is positioned really well. And going back to the election again on November 5th, we have a whole new administration in Washington, D.C. And the reason I bring that up, I mean, there's no secret that I support President Trump. There's no secret that we have dialogue about Alaska. And I think that's important because rarely in the history of the state of Alaska have you had a president of the United States really take an interest in Alaska. Politically, we're small. We have small numbers. We have 3 electoral votes. We have 1 congressperson. We have 2 senators. But we're 730,000 people. We're the population of a county at the top of the world. And so for most of our history, I would argue, we've been forgotten. But under President Trump's first term, he was very focused on Alaska, creating opportunities for Alaska, creating jobs for Alaskans, creating revenue for Alaskans. And I would be remiss if I didn't say I'm thrilled to death that he's back in office. Because we begin the discussions already, and he understands what Alaska is all about. And a lot of our folks in Washington, D.C., we've formed relationships with over the years. Folks that had known Don Young really well in Congress. through our federal delegation, our senators as well. And so I think Alaska, not just this country, but Alaska is poised to do very, very well on policy. If we choose to pursue good policy, I think you can see everything from a gas line. I think you can see our forest monetized and now managed for the future generations like other countries do. Our CCUS policies, our regulations are almost complete. We completed our carbon transfer policies for trees last year. We are getting inquiries from places in the lower 48 and across the world in terms of carbon monetization, because I know there'll be questions about, well, what tax or revenue generation idea do you have, Dunleavy? The resource production in the state can more than pay for our way if we consummate great policy as we move forward. And so we rolled out carbon ideas. We're going to roll out forestry ideas. Things like the gas line are going to be needed for energy in the state of Alaska, and not just energy for in-state, but energy for export, energy for potential data farms, energy for the fertilizer plants so that we can capitalize on our farmland possibilities here, our farming possibilities. So a whole host of things can happen if we all work together. And so I'm looking forward to working with the legislature. I'm going to be looking at policies, not personality, and I think we all should be. The race is over. The elections have been determined. The elections have been completed. Recounts have been completed. So we've got all the ingredients in Alaska to really, really, over the next 2 years, this next session, to really, I think, take advantage of so many things. And so I just want to leave the people of this great state with again, with a lot of hope, because we do have a lot of hope. I always say that Alaska's best years are ahead of us. And some of those years are going to happen starting right now. I would anticipate that when the president is sworn in on January 20th, that there will be a series of executive sessions, I think, that will not just touch America, but Alaska as well. I think you'll see some things reversed that were, I say, inflicted upon Alaska by the last administration. You know, it was very doubtful whether the federal authorities debating whether we should become a state were going to allow us to become a state. They questioned whether a state of this size, landmass-wise, could take care of itself, could run itself with only 200,000 people at the time, or 220,000 people. So we were basically, some folks may not know this, we were basically forced through the Statehood Act and negotiations with the federal government to collectivize all of our resources under the sovereign. So in Alaska, you have very few landowners. You have the state, the feds, our native corporations, and then so very little land is distributed to others, unlike other states. They did this because they wanted us to monetize our resources. They wanted us to maximize the monetization of those resources. We've done a pretty good job with things like oil. We've done a pretty good job historically with our fishing industry, although that's a topic that's going to have to be discussed here this session too, as we go into the future. But gas, trees, farmland, our location on the globe, these are all resources that I think the framers of our Constitution, I'm talking about the state, would be telling us to really start to work on and really monetize those for our kids and our grandkids. We talk about our schools. We talk about needing more money for schools. Well, some of the things not being discussed in schools is that our population of school-age children is dropping. We just don't have the children in numbers that we have previously in the past several decades. It's a fact. It's happening across the country, but it's happening here in Alaska. So as your population, your school-age population drops, the whole funding formula to an extent is tied to population in schools. So when people tell you that are advocates for money only, that it's just, everything gets fixed just simply by adding money, you got to have an honest, serious, deep discussion as to what's happening with our schools. And part of that is our demographics are changing. There was a report that came out a few days ago on population in general in Alaska. And there's some predictions that if we don't turn things around and, again, create opportunities, create an environment for kids and young people to want to stay here, Southeast Alaska may lose up to 17% of its population here in the next several years. So we're aging rapidly in the state of Alaska. but it doesn't have to be that way. That's the great thing about the legislative process. That's the great thing about Alaska. You know, if we were California or New York, where it's so big, it's so stodgy, it's so tough to do business, we might be having a different discussion. But here in the great state of Alaska, there's 20 senators, there's 40 representatives, and there's one governor. And for the next 90 days, we can create a phenomenal future for this state, a phenomenal future. Or we could end up arguing with each other, fighting with each other, like it's a very special high school. And so, again, there's tremendous opportunities. The framers want us to pursue our resources. You're going to see policies rolled out to do that. But in the end, I would say that the budget we're rolling out, once again, is in compliance with our Constitution and all applicable laws. We're going to talk in just a second here on revenue. Then we'll talk about highlights in the budget, and then we'll open it up for questions. And probably in the next couple weeks, probably before the session starts, we'll have another press conference in order to give the press and others time to examine the budget, think about some of the things that are being rolled out, so we can have a much deeper conversation about policy and where the state's going to go. So with that, I would ask that Commissioner Crum come up, talk about revenue and a couple other things related to Department of Revenue, and then we'll have Lacey come up. Where are you? There you are.
Rarely do I have to adjust the mic down. Thank you, Governor Dunleavy. I'm Adam Crum. I'm the Commissioner for the Department of Revenue. Good afternoon. Today, we have published the Department of Revenue's Fall 2024 Revenue Sources Book. The publication provides a recent history and projection of the state revenues and is a collaborative effort among the Department of Revenue and several other state agencies and departments. The revenue forecast is intended to be a policy-neutral document that provides fundamental data and information to inform the public and aid decision-makers. The revenue forecast is based on detailed modeling and reflects the department's current expectations for numerous variables, including investment returns, oil price, oil production, and oil company spending. The revenue outlook has decreased slightly for all years compared to the spring 2024 forecast. This is due to lower oil prices as well as higher lease expenditures. A lower production forecast also contributed to the decreases seen through FY 2030, but there is an expected increase in production and revenues after that. For unrestricted general fund, or UGF revenue, compared to the spring forecast, DOR is forecasting a $220 million decrease for FY 25, as well as $240 million decrease for FY 26. The two largest components of UGF revenue are oil prices and investment returns. For the oil price forecast, it is based on the futures market for as many years as are available. The following numbers are based on the median futures outlook for the last 5 trading days in November. Key highlights are Alaska North Slope, or ANS oil prices, are forecasted to have average prices of $73.86 per barrel for FY 2025. That is down $4.14 per barrel from the spring forecast. For FY 2026, oil is forecast to be $70 per barrel, which is down $4 from the spring forecast. The department's forecast assumes the annual average price will remain fairly stable, reaching $73 per barrel in FY 2035. The longer-term forecast also has an increase in revenue that reflects increased optimism about new developments, in particular Willow and Pika, based on positive news and active construction as those fields come closer to first oil. As for investment returns, the forecast is based on actual returns through October 2024, plus a most likely case for expected investment returns. The percent of market value, or POMV, the draw from the permanent fund is the largest percentage of unrestricted general funds, and it is set to be a transfer of $3.7 billion to the general fund in FY 2025 and $3.8 billion in FY 2026. It's worth noting that in fiscal year 2019, Alaska transitioned from depending primarily on oil revenues to fund government to also utilizing investments for a significant share of unrestricted general fund revenue. Alaska is now, at least partially, an endowment state. And this is where a large percentage of revenues are generated by investment income and not by taxes. Alaska is the first state in the United States to achieve this status. Outside of those two main figures, when you look at the overall health of the state, our GO bonding capacity is roughly $1.4 billion. We'll actually have our updated debt book will be coming out. It's due at the end of January. Our credit rating over the last couple of years, we've actually increased this to AA stable or AA positive across multiple agencies, largely due to the fact of the governor's control of stable budget and growth, as well as bringing in outside investment in the active construction work in the oil patch. I'll conclude my remarks by stating that this fall 2024 revenue forecast comes during a time of uncertainty of recent geopolitical events causing volatile market conditions. It's important to note this forecast represents one plausible scenario within a range of potential outcomes. As always, thank you for your time, and I'll now hand this off to Director Sanders.
Good afternoon, everyone. My name is Lacey Sanders. I'm the Office of Management and Budget Director. I'm going to walk through some more technical details and numbers associated with the budget, as well as highlight a few items for you all today. Thank you. So the FY2026 budget totals $14.2 billion. Of that, $11.4 billion is associated with the operating and the statewide items in the budget. The capital budget this year totals $2.8 billion. I want to emphasize that this budget does not include any proposed reductions. Any reductions will have to be determined through legislative actions. There are items that were previously appropriated. These are called one-time funding. Those do not carry forward each year and have been removed from the budget. There's an overall reduction to the budget from 2025 to 2026 of approximately $280 million. This year's budget and the current year's budget and the next year's budget for 2026 both do rely on a draw from our savings account, the Constitutional Budget Reserve Fund. The current year, 2025, due to reduced oil prices, does result in approximately $150 million being drawn from the CBR. And in 2026, the proposed budget draws $1.5 billion from that savings account. I'm going to highlight a few items. First off, I'd like to note that this budget includes a full statutory permanent fund dividend as outlined in law. Following that, there are other programs throughout the budget that are statutorily required, and we follow that same statutes when applying those. So for example, I'll move on to education. There are no cuts or reductions to education funding. The foundation formula for K through 12 and for pupil transportation are both fully funded at the statutory level. Other programs within education that are fully funded include the school debt reimbursement and the REAA Small Municipal School District Fund, which are based on a statutory formula as well. A few highlights within the university's budget are two programs that are continuing from last year. One is the University of Fairbanks' continued advancement to achieve R1 status, as well as the continued development of a drone economy for the university's drone program. The governor has spoken to both resource development and energy needs in the state of Alaska. There are significant items this year in the budget as well to address that. One key item that you will see is a $50 million appropriation to the ADA Corporation that will backstop the AKLNG project, the Alaska Gas Line Natural Gas Pipeline project, for front-end engineering and design. This $50 million appropriation is identified as a supplemental in the bill to allow for it to move forward very quickly. Other energy-related items include the Dixon Diversion Bradley Lake Hydropower Project, as well as additional funding for the renewable energy grant funds. The Power Cost Equalization Fund also is fully funded based on the statutory formula. And we have several projects in the Department of Natural Resources for forest management to increase access to DNR lands and resources. There's a second supplemental item in the budget related to the Alaska Seafood Marketing Institute. This is $10 million of investment over 3 years to increase the marketing of Alaska's seafood in the state. Another top priority of the governor continues to be public safety. We have many items in the budget to address increased public safety across the state. A few items include the addition of a new trooper post. We'll be opening a post in the Talkeetna area to provide additional law enforcement coverage to Willow, Talkeetna, and Trapper Creek along the North Parks Highway corridor. There are 3 new state trooper investigator positions being added to the budget to continue efforts in fighting crimes against children in Kotzebue, Nome, and the Northwest Arctic region, as well as increased village public safety officers from 85 to 90, so 5 additional VPSOs in this budget. There's a capital request as well to allow the Department of Public Safety to respond to emergency rural response across the Alaska, and this is for the purchase of a new aircraft, which is called the Pilatus. Lastly, there are 2 deposits in the budget. One is a supplemental deposit of $15 million, and the second is a deposit of $13 million in 2026 to recapitalize the Disaster Relief Fund so that the Department of Military and Veteran Affairs and other state agencies can respond timely to disasters in the state. Lastly, I'll highlight a few items that continue building Alaska over the next 50 years. One is across 3 agencies, the Department of Labor, Workforce Development, the Department of Education and Early Development, and the Department of Corrections. Each of these agencies have requests for expanded development of electrical and plumber workforce programs within their agencies. And I'd like to speak just a moment about some transportation projects in the state. There is capital request for heavy maintenance in the Dalton Highway, as well as increasing aggregate stockpiles in that area, and expanded road access for the West Sioux. Lastly, under childcare, the legislature last year passed legislation to increase childcare assistance in the state. Based on this expanded eligibility, there's a $6 million increase to address childcare needs in the state of Alaska. Finally, I'll just note that there are substantial programs within the Alaska Housing Finance Corporation. There's $58 million associated with housing programs for homelessness, as well as rural professional housing and other programs to increase affordability for Alaskans. And with that, I'll turn it over to the governor.
Thanks, Lacey. Grant, we're going to open up for questions.
Hi. So I was curious about, why draw from savings to pay the PF? Why draw from CVR to statute?
You have the PFDs in law, just like some of these other programs are in law. You don't have enough revenue, but you have savings. So you have to make a choice as to whether you're going to reduce education or reduce other aspects of the program to get that budget balance. But let me talk for a moment about the PFD. The PFD was once hailed as one of the greatest ideas any state has ever come up with. And then as oil revenue started to decrease, a number of folks, it's always been an issue ever since the PFD came into existence. There were people that believe that you should not be giving money to Alaskans, that you should be giving money to programs or giving money to certain groups that want money. And there are many of us, and I think the majority of Alaskans today, if there was a poll done tomorrow morning, would probably say that we would prefer to have the PFD, especially now in the inflationary era that we're in. So you have a law in the books. And the question, I guess, is which law do we not follow? So we're going to follow the laws, and we have the savings. So that's why you have the budget designed as it is.
Next, we're going to Mark Sabatini with the Juneau Empire.
Thank you. This on? Okay, got it. Mark Sabatini, Juneau Empire. According to your 10-year plan, the budget goes into a $1 billion deficit by fiscal 2028, and by fiscal 2035 has a $12 billion deficit. The question is, do you consider that a responsible long-range plan? If so, why? And if not, why are you putting this forward? And what, if any, actions do you plan to
Yeah,
take to
well,
keep us from getting $12 billion
Sure, I
in
just
debt?
told you that this is the law. I don't create the laws. The legislature makes the laws. So this budget is based upon the Constitution and the laws. That's the budget you have. With regard to predictions of the future, this is one of the reasons why I started this press conference by saying we have a real opportunity to develop more revenue from our resources. Tremendous opportunity. You can't have a world where you want more programs, but you're unwilling to do what it takes to get the revenue to create those programs. Some would like to see the entire permanent fund disappear. 7 years ago, when I was in the Senate, there was the mantra of, we got to change the permanent fund dividend to save it. Today, it's down to almost 25% if you look at what the legislature has done the last couple years. That doesn't look like it's saving the permanent fund dividend. That looks like the permanent fund dividend is going to go out of business. I've always proposed that we do everything we can to produce more oil, more gas, more minerals. As I started this press conference, I said we have a real opportunity to do that. Pica, Willow are going to put more oil in the pipeline and help produce more revenue for us. We believe our CCUS approach is already getting interest across the world, even though things may change in Washington with regard to carbon, and we don't know to what degree. Every indication we have, our investors internationally are still interested in monetizing carbon and looking at Alaska. So when we see a problem, Mark, we're trying to address it. We don't know what oil is going to cost tomorrow morning. We've said this before. But based upon what we have, based upon the projections that we know, this is the budget we're putting forward. We think it's a good budget. And yeah, there's no doubt that there are a lot of special interests that don't want the PFD. But I would say this. They said if you change it 7 years ago, we can save it. There were people 7 years ago that said, all we need is a little bit of it, just a little bit. And if we keep going in the direction that we're going, because you're going to see big programs introduced by the legislature this year. We've already talked about that last year. Defined benefits, several $100 million more for education. Really the question is going to be, I hope, that you ask the same question to the legislature. How do you propose to pay for these programs that that everyone anticipates are going to be introduced, and still have a PFD, still have a state trooper force, still plow the roads? The only way you're going to do it is if we move quickly to try to monetize as much of our resources as possible. But again, we don't know what the price is going to be. This is what we have now. This is what we're putting forward.
Next, we have Becky Bohr with the Associated Press.
Governor, you mentioned the report from labor about population. Talked a lot about energy, but what in particular are you looking at, or perhaps planning to propose by way of support for families, not only bringing people?
Yeah, we're working on some childcare. And do you want to mention anything on families, on the childcare part?
Good afternoon, everyone. Heidi Hedberg. I'm the Commissioner for the Department of Health. And under the Governor, he formed a task force. It was significant work over the past 2 years. Both of those reports have been completed, and they're on the Department of Health website. And so right now, we are working through those recommendations. A lot of it is regulatory changes. And so that's what we're currently focusing on right now, is updating our regulations so that we can increase access to quality childcare. We know when parents have access, if they choose to work, that it's going to bolster their the economy, it's going to bolster the community, and really help with that population stability.
We've also introduced tax credit bills on childcare last year. And our efforts at increasing our reading performance, our efforts at expanding our charter schools, our efforts at supporting our home schools, these are all programs that help families with children. And having the best charter school system in the country, which some wish we didn't talk about, because it's inconvenient for some that just want more money in education. but having a great charter school system, having a great correspondence homeschool system, and working hard to have a great neighborhood school system, I think assists families as well. And so there's going to be a number of things that, again, we'll have discussions in policy this session that I think are going to help families. As a matter of fact, Becky, I think almost everything we do helps families. If we can drive the crime rate down, that's going to help families. If we can create jobs, that's going to help families. You know, what's interesting is a lot of our resource plays actually take place in rural Alaska, where a lot of Alaskans are looking for work. A lot of municipalities are looking for revenue. Again, if you hit these things on multiple fronts, it's going to help everyone, especially families with children.
All right, we're going to move to the phones now and go to Jack Barnwell with the Fairbanks Daily News Miner.
Yeah, for the $50 million backstop for the speed, there has been some criticisms about that not containing the Fairbanks lateral. Any thoughts of probably that changing?
We see gas getting the Fairbanks first, to be honest with you. The whole line is going to benefit the entire state of Alaska. As a matter of fact, Senator Bishop, myself, Senator Hoffman, when I was a senator, we put an amendment in the gas line bills to ensure that revenue that comes from that gas line bills provides a funding for energy projects in rural Alaska. But Fairbanks, the Nenana, Denali Borough, Matsu Borough, Kenai, Anchorage, everyone is going to benefit from this project. So the answer to that question is we will have gas going to Fairbanks. There's no doubt. It's going to be part of the plan.
All right, moving next to Iris Samuels with the Anchorage Daily News.
Thanks, Governor. My question is about education funding. You mentioned there is a separate education bill coming, but given the fact that there wasn't any new education funding added to this budget proposal, I'm wondering what amount of education funding increase would you support, again, as long as it's paired with some of those other proposals that you want it paired with in that bill?
Yeah, that's a great question. So the bill will come out, and the funding that's embedded in that bill, if the package goes forward, is going to be pretty close to what we have now. It's going to be roughly $200 million. So if we are able to come to agreement on the bill and the changes in how we do education, we're probably looking at $200 million going forward on a permanent basis. And so we hope to solve a number of issues. Again, the whole idea here is to address a number of issues that have come up over the last several years.
All right, up next we have Andrew Kitchenman with the Alaska Beacon.
Governor, past governors have also said that the state should develop its resources, and it seems like the state would have gotten more revenue than it has if it had been as successful as past governors have hoped. Should Alaskans be concerned about the size of deficit looking into the future if the only possible plan is resource revenue that can be affected by global markets and federal law and federal administrations?
No, I don't think they should be worried. I think they should be excited about the possibilities. Again, Andrew, if we unleash and we are not stopped or prohibited by the federal government from maximizing our resources, we're going to have more oil in the pipeline. We're going to get more oil in the pipeline now. You know, through the work that, for example, Hillcorp has done in squeezing out more oil in a brownfield situation, our decline has been minimized. With the result of what ConocoPhillips is doing in Willow, we're going to have more oil. Santos, the list goes on our smaller producers in the state of Alaska. What happened the past 4 years is we had an attempt at social engineering society here in the United States by the Biden administration. Now, to be fair, I thank the Biden administration for assisting with renewables, but it should have never been done at the expense of fossil fuels. Never. We need more energy than you can possibly imagine. Some estimates 3 times the amount of energy that we have right now. But going back to the resource development, if we manage our trees well over the next a couple decades, we may have a timber industry such as Sweden, which realizes upwards of $18 billion a year with a B in forest products. If we are able to get investors to come to Alaska, and we have some talking to us now about sequestering carbon in the inlet, for example, we could be realizing billions of dollars in income. Mining, we could be realizing, you won't see as much revenue, but you'll see jobs in a lot of ancillary industries. We have data farms that want to come to Alaska to be able to utilize our environment, but also cheap energy. I think we have tremendous opportunity. The idea, once again, I think if you really look into it, and I would ask the press to really take a look at it, the idea that if you just use a piece of the PFD or you just tax over here or tax over there, I'd love to see the data that says that taxing more and taking more of the PFD is a recipe for a growing state, more vibrancy, more jobs for young people. I don't see it. And again, as I mentioned, if we do more resource development, the impacts are felt greater in rural Alaska when it comes to jobs and taxation by municipalities. And so, should they be worried? What the people of Alaska should be worried about is business as usual in Juneau, that we spend 90 to 120 days just arguing about things that really aren't going to make a difference in the trajectory of the state. But I mean, if we can put some good policy together, a lot of these discussions that we've had for 10, 15 years are going to go by the wayside.
All right, a reminder for folks on the phone to please mute your phone after you've asked your question. Next, we have Steve Straight with KRUP.
Good afternoon, Governor. Steve Straight, KRUP, in Dillingham and KEDI in Bethel. Just a question here. Both the newly organized, both House and Senate, are controlled by the Democrats, have announced goals to increase the BSA and reinstitute defined benefits as a goals, and that'll bring associated budget increases. The question is, with your proposed budget and the legislature's final budget, do you believe you can ensure Alaskans will continue to receive a permanent fund payments over the next 2 years? Thank you.
Well, that's a great question, Steve. As I mentioned earlier, the PFD, the statutory PFD is on the books. That's what we've introduced. People ask me why I do that. Well, because it's the law and it's on the books, and I think it's a great Alaskan institution. But there's others that don't think that way, and so the PFD has been diminished through legislative action over the last couple years. That's a great question. Will a program in defined benefits cost more than the state can afford? Those are discussions that have to happen this year. Will a price tag on increases in education? I don't know what that'll end up at. Is that something that could be afforded going forward? Again, I think if you match revenue and projected revenue through development, while we could do our projections on our permanent fund income, and all we can do is try as hard as we can to get more businesses in Alaska that at the very least are going to help our local communities, our families, but also would provide hopefully revenue. I think we can have a balanced discussion. But the framers of the Constitution, it created a strong executive. And if you ever get bored at night, go ahead and read the minutes of the Constitutional Convention as it applies to the executive. Sometimes I think there are some folks in the state of Alaska that would like to portray the governor as just heavy-handed and just running wild on the budget. Fact of the matter is, the framers took a long time and developed a concept of strong executive because they believe that the executive has to control spending in the state of Alaska. So as long as I'm governor, we're gonna make sure that we have a budget that's gonna work within our revenue and our savings. And we're going to work our tails off to try and get more development, more production, more revenue in the state of Alaska through accessing our resources. So we'll have to see where this goes, Steve. That's part of the discussions with the legislature.
All right, next we have Steve Kirch with Alaska's News Source. Steve, if you're there, we can't hear you.
Yes, can you hear me okay?
Yes.
Yes, so Governor, going back to the legislature, you're going to have,
you're going to have a different majority in the House than last session, and you saw the pitfalls you ran into last session with education legislation, with trying to change outcomes. How do you expect a different outcome this year around, with Democratic majority in the House?
Sometimes you get different members. Sometimes you have people over a period of time think through things. And sometimes people come to the realization that margins are so thin in the legislature that it's probably a great idea to work with the bodies, the caucuses, and the governor. You got to keep, you got to believe that we can do better than maybe what we have done over the last several years. And so we know what the problems are. We have some solutions to the problems. We just have to make sure that we're focused on fixing the problems and less so on the politics and the personalities.
All right, next we have Jeff Landfield with the Alaska Landmine.
Hi, can you hear me?
Yes, go ahead, Jeff.
Sorry about the feedback. I'm in the Vegas airport, so I'm getting on a plane. Just to follow up on some of the previous questions, Governor, the last 6 years, you've either had a Republican House or Senate who have provided you some cover on some of the more controversial issues. And I'm kind of wondering, with this dividend proposal, which I understand it's a law, but it consumes 40% of the revenues and other issues, how do you plan on navigating that relationship? And are you concerned that you're starting off again by giving them a large dividend, which you know is not going to be the reality because for 6 years they've reduced it? So I'm curious about the relationship with the Democrat-controlled House and Senate, going forward the next 2 years.
Well, Jeff, anyone that's surprised that I would uphold the law and put forward a dividend that's based upon the law hasn't been paying attention the last 6 years. It's the law. The funding for a lot of our programs, some of it is embedded in law. We're following that. As I mentioned when we started out, this budget is constitutionally and statutorily followed in its creation and its implementation. This is a starting point. We all know that. This is a discussion point. We all know that. Again, anyone in this business down here in Juneau, in the legislature, in my executive, that doesn't see this as a discussion point and having to work together to get a final budget, they haven't been paying attention the last 6 years. And so I guess to answer your question, we are compelled by Constitution and law to put together a budget. There are processes in place. There are vetoes. There are veto overrides. There are discussions. There's committee meetings. There's a whole host of mechanisms to get to a final product. Again, this is what the framers envisioned when they put this Constitution together. All I'm saying is we have some real opportunities. There's going to be compromise across the board. There has to be compromise across the board. There always is. But especially this year, because the margins are pretty thin, again, in the legislature, in the bodies, in the caucuses. And so our door is open, my door is open to have these discussions to get to where we need to go. And so the idea that somebody's feelings are going to get hurt because we put a budget together in a certain manner, that's kind of the I guess the mentality that I'm talking about that really needs to go by the wayside. You got a budget. We take a look at the budget. We're going to have legislators that are going to have priorities, legislators that are going to have bills. A lot of these bills are probably going to be decent bills that help Alaskans. We're going to want to work with them on getting their bills across the finish line. We have some great ideas. Our hope is that they're going to work with us to get bills across the finish line to help Alaskans. But if we just keep looking at the concept of helping Alaskans as opposed to this individual or that individual down here in Juneau, I think we're going to get some things done. We have to.
All right, next we have Sean McGuire with the Anchorage Daily News.
Hi, thanks very much. Governor, you said we need a budget that works, but again, going back to your 10-year plan, we're in deficit now by $1.5 billion, and that extends out for the foreseeable future. The constitutional budget reserve would be emptied in a few years. You've again, as you said, repeatedly proposed a full dividend because it's the law. What is your proposal to address that? How are you going to fix that law to make it that the budget does work into the future?
Oh, that's a discussion that the legislature also has to have with themselves. because not all legislators, well, if all legislators wanted a change in the permanent fund dividend, it would have been changed. We wouldn't be having this discussion. If the majority of Alaskans wanted a change in the dividend, we'd have a change. We wouldn't be having this discussion. So by virtue of it not being changed, that means there are a number of people in the legislature, as well as people in Alaska, that would prefer to have a dividend that follows the statute, the current statute. There are proposals, I'm sure, and there will be proposals that will come forth to change the dividend. We'll take a look at that, but whatever's going to happen has got to be done in the best interest of Alaskans. This is the law. This is not a surprise to people. I'm sure there are some people that were hoping, and some special interest groups that were hoping that we would not put forward a full dividend, but that's not going to happen. That won't happen next year either. We're going to follow the law. And so we'll work on people on a number of different bills, and if people want to bring up bills regarding the dividend, we'll have a discussion with them. We'll take a look at it and see if it works for Alaska.
Next, we have Neil Steininger with the Alaska report. Neil, go ahead. You're there, Neil. We can't hear you. So we will move on to Yareth Rosen and come back. Yareth Rosen with the Alaska Beacon.
Yeah, hi. Governor, Commissioner Crum said that Alaska has become an endowment state, but you talk a lot about future resource revenue, and I was wondering if you think this endowment state situation is a permanent change, or do you think that Alaska will go back to the way it was in the past when oil revenues contributed like 90% of the operating funds?
Well, let me answer by saying this. I hope we don't continue to have a state in which we rely on one revenue source like oil. The permanent fund is a result of, for the most part, oil, but other royalties as well. I envision a future in which our revenue streams look more along the lines of oil, gas, timber, mining, but also other industries coming to Alaska, expanding airport. But I do think that the permanent fund is going to be a critical part of government revenue going forward. And as was mentioned, there's predictions that this permanent fund is on course to reach $100 billion here by 2030-31. I think a combination of revenue, new revenues as a result of new industries, and the permanent fund, I think is a good mix for the state of Alaska. And again, it's not just the state government that we should be focused on, paying the state government. We need to pay the bills. We need to provide services, there's no doubt about it. But we also need to create private sector jobs. We need to create opportunities for young people in the state of Alaska. And so I think it's a combination of.
Next, we have Ashlyn O'Hara with KDLL.
Hi, Governor. Setting aside the $50 million backstop from ADA for the Alaska LNG project, would you be supportive of contributing any additional state financial resources to get that project complete? And then also, I guess, what type of support are you expecting that project will receive from the Donald Trump White House? Thank you.
Yeah, great question. So this project is a very large project in its totality. We're talking about phase one, which is the pipeline itself. And I'll just talk for a minute about what's different today than, let's say, 5 years ago. Prior to 2020, we did not have all the permits, federal permits, for this project. Prior to 2020, we didn't have sellers of gas getting interested in selling gas. For example, Great Bear Pantheon, Hillcorp, Exxon, ConocoPhillips. There's genuine discussions happening on selling the gas. We have a problem in Cook Inlet. We've known we've had a problem in Cook Inlet. And again, this is what this administration has been about for the past several years, is trying to solve these problems. We know that we're running out of gas in Cook Inlet. There's still gas in Cook Inlet, and as we're working on advancing this pipeline, we're also working on making sure that we can get as much gas out of the inlet as possible. I would say that the $50 million, again, is to update the cost of the pipeline itself from 2015. That was the last analysis we had on what the pipeline would cost. We believe that once that feed, as they call it, is updated over the next several months, that we'll have an established cost for that line, and then investors can take a look at it. Now, some will say, well, Dunleavy, there's been inflation. There's all kinds of stuff happening. The cost of that line is going to be more today than it was back in 2015. That's true. We want to find out what that cost is. But the cost of this line is going to be more today, as well as the cost of other lines are going to be more today. Because we're looking at steel, we're looking at labor, we're looking at machinery. And so no matter where there's going to be a gas line, anywhere in this world, the costs are going to be higher. The line itself and the project itself has advanced considerably. Permits, buyers of gas are lining up. Sellers are having discussions. We've got investors looking at the gas line. And so once again, we believe if we can get this updated feed done here in the next several months, I think we are as close as we've ever thought we could be to a line. And I think we'll end up consummating a line here over the next year or so.
All right, we're going to go back to Neil Steininger with the Alaska Political Report. Neil, go ahead.
Just pop the window open there.
Thank you. Thanks for coming back around, and thank you, Governor. So when you took office, you inherited a large deficit that really came from a significant imbalance between statutory obligations to spend and recurring revenues. State statutes require that you produce a balanced budget, but they also require that your 10-year plan include the broad strokes of how you intend to address any long-term structural budget deficit. However, last year and again this year, you've omitted any of those statutory required discussions on solutions, and you show that savings are effectively empty when you leave office. What policies do you plan to introduce over the next 2 years to ensure that Alaska's next governor doesn't inherit the same problems that you did and that you've been tackling over the last 6 years?
Yeah, let me try. Help me unpack that just for a second here, Neil. Are you talking about sales tax, income tax?
I'm talking, the state statute requires that you have the broad strokes within your 10-year plan to avoid, the very picture that your 10-year plan shows, to balance the collection of revenue and the expenditure of revenues. And your 10-year plan this year and your 10-year plan last year completely omit any discussion on solutions. And, what I'm wondering is what solutions do you plan to put forward to try to ensure that the problems that you were faced with when you entered office aren't going to face our next governor?
Well, again, we began the process in earnest to monetize a resource known as carbon. We believe that's going to bring more money to the state of Alaska. We believe that with the new administration in Washington, we were hoping with the Biden administration that would be able to sell our ANWR leases, not constrict those ANWR leases, that NPRA would not be taken off the table. So again, if you're asking me, am I going to put forward a income tax or a sales tax? I'm not advocating that in the budget. However, if the legislature wants to do that, we'll have a conversation with them about it. But again, I believe that the resource base of Alaska is the solution to the future. I believe an income tax on the people of Alaska, a sales tax on the people of Alaska, taking what's left of the dividend from the people of Alaska. If that's going to happen, I would suggest that we all invest in U-Haul, to be honest with you. It doesn't have to be that way.
All right, the last question we received from a reporter on email, it's about ASME and the seafood industry in general. Is the $10 million the same that was vetoed this summer? This is basically a reversal of the veto. And what other things are in there to help the seafood industry?
Yeah, it's 10 million over 3 years, not 10 million in 1 year. And what was missing last year was a marketing plan and a marketing approach that utilized those resources to make sure we can get into new markets. So that's the discussion we're going to have with the legislature, but it's different than last year in terms of it being spread out over 3 years and having discussions and settling on marketing approaches for new markets for the seafood. So, well, I want to thank you all for coming today. I'm excited about this year. And just because some may say the last several years, quote, have not settled this issue or solved that issue, that doesn't mean this year has to be like that. We have tremendous opportunity. We have new folks coming down. There's new ideas being generated by people. Again, we have the tools available to us to create an Alaska that I think most people dreamed of. We have the tools available to create an Alaska for our kids and grandkids. We just have to make sure that when we're down here, we utilize our time effectively when we're down here. We're down here for 90 days, sometimes 120 days. But I think we have solutions within the legislature, solutions within the administration that we can draw upon, come together. We're going to have to compromise on some issues, but I think we can move this great state forward. And so, again, I'm looking forward to working with the legislature. We are running out of time on some things, as was brought up, but I think we have tremendous opportunity with the new administration that's pro-opportunity, pro-development. I think time is running out on things like Cook Inlet gas in terms of large supplies. I think we have opportunities to generate more energy, cheap energy for Alaskans. I think we have opportunity here to create a school system we can all be proud of. I think there's a whole host of things we can do. And again, I'm more than willing to work with anybody and everybody that has solutions to problems. And I hope that's what we get down here this year, all of us working together. And we'll keep the people of Alaska posted. And I want to wish everyone a Merry Christmas and a Happy New Year. Thanks, guys.